zero level or near zero level, a lot of other things will spiral from there, and Nigeria will truly be transformed. Our speaker today is a human rights lawyer and a good governance advocate. He has a passion for social action litigation and has actively been involved in public interest litigation for over 14 years, including the challenge of the unlawful ban of Twitter and the ill treatment of the EndSARS protesters. He's Deputy Director at SERAP, where he coordinates the advocacy and litigation programs. He's an alumnus of Obafemi Awolowo University and the Lagos Business School. Please welcome with me Oluwadare Kolawole. Mr. Kolawole, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pastor. Thank you very much for having me here. It's really a great privilege and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
No problem. I want to thank you very much for accepting to be here today. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, a human rights lawyer, good governance advocate. How did you find yourself in that space? Question number one. Then SERAP. Okay, what is SERAP? For those who do not know, what do they do? Why was it set up? What has it achieved? And what direction is SERAP going? Maybe those two things can give us a platform on which to engage in this conversation.
Thank you very much. You had said it's two things, but to me it sounds like a lot of things, particularly in the context of, of my little experience. So as to my own profile, unlike some Nigerian politicians, I wouldn't say it's accidental. We have a lot of accidental leaders in Nigeria, by the way. I've been called to the bar in 2008. I'd always found myself doing public interest litigation, which of course is an aspect of human rights practice. And so it wasn't by accident that I found myself in an organization like SERAP in 2019. Doing what I love to do the most, and which also coincides with the objective of SERAP. And SERAP, by the way, is socioeconomic rights and accountability project. I love to say that it's a project because it's continuous. There can never be a end to advocating for socioeconomic rights, even if we progress and develop further than we are presently in Nigeria. But SERAP was set up in 2004. And like the acronym stands for, to advocate for the socioeconomic rights of Nigerians, knowing fully well, and this has improved by research also, that socioeconomic rights are the main drivers of any kind of government, particularly the democratic government. And that corruption, or let's call it transparency and accountability, or the lack of it, are the main things that is preventing the socioeconomic rights of Nigeria from being fully implemented and promoted. And SERAP uses a lot of tools. I can say fortunately or unfortunately, public interest litigation appears to be the most famous that people know SERAP for. But we also do a lot of things, including conversations like this. I like to call it advocacy. So there are legal aspects of the advocacy, and there are other aspects as well, which includes writing letters, open letters to those in public office, including the president and other international organizations, advisories from time to time, and we also do research, public enlightenment and education, and of course, public interest litigation, which SERAP does so well. We use the local courts and the instruments of courts to promote and enforce the rights of Nigerians. And we've also had courts many times. We also use international legal mechanisms, including the UN mechanisms, the African Union mechanisms, which is the African Court and the African Commission, and of course, the ECOWAS Court situated in Abuja, Nigeria. And we've had a lot of impact, call it outcome, over the years. We have been able to not only hold government to account, as people would like to say, but also demonstrate to Nigerians that people can hold government to account without necessarily resorting to violence or any other unlawful act. Of course, using the instrumentality of the courts, which is open to every Nigerian, will be able to demonstrate that. And we've had our losses in courts, as lawyers will say, And we've had our wins, and lots of it, where the court had made pronouncements that supported the cause of Nigerians that Serap has brought to the court. And I think that the major outcome for me will be that the people see that they can stand up to government, not in the form of political opposition or in any kind of unlawful activity, but to challenge whatever they see as anomalies in governance with the understanding that it is supposed to enrich democratic experience. I remember clearly one of what I call one of our stellar wins was in 2020 when the government of President Muhammadu Buhari banned Twitter. We considered it unlawful. And we went to the ECOWAS court. And I remember clearly then that the Attorney General that's Malami Essien, threatened publicly that any Nigerian that is found to have been using VPNs, because a lot of Nigerians started using VPNs to bypass the blockade, will be jailed, will be dealt with. So we went to court and we got a provisional order from the ECOWAS court. And I'm very happy that the ECOWAS court has, over the years, stood up to defend the rights of Nigerians as intended by the African Charter. And the court ruled in our favor. And ultimately, the court granted that provisional measure, stopping the Nigerian government from arresting anyone, which was why no arrest was made for anyone that was using VPNs at that time. And subsequently, a year after, the court ruled on a substantive application and declared that the ban of Twitter was unlawful, and also went further to tell the Nigerian government not to take such actions again. And I think over the years, this advocacy has grown. People now understand. And conversations like this, which I'm also very happy, and I appreciate this opportunity to also widen the conversation so that people get to know, they understand the context of advocacy. It need not be political, it need not be religious driven, and it really shouldn't be tribal in any sense. It is all about good governance. And we've done that over the years successfully since 2004.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask for a deeper dive into Serap. Who founded Serap? How did Serap come to be? And how did you get your funding, if I may ask?
Yes, so Serap was started by that Mr. Adetuko Mumini and Dr. Kolawole Olaniyan, who had been the chairman of the board in the past. Mr. Mumini is the president director, by the way, and I'm the deputy director in 2004. And it's basically to use public interest litigation, also called strategic litigation by those who understand it, to press on the demands to promote socioeconomic rights. And it has fared well. As to our funding, and I do get asked that a lot, particularly by those in public institutions who sometimes believe that the aim of those lawsuits are not as are not sincere as they see it. We are funded, of course, we are not funded by Nigerians, by the Nigerian government. We're funded by donations from the public and from our international partners, chief among which is the MacArthur Foundation, the Fund Foundation, the OSF, and these are also agencies that also have partnerships and funding, a lot of times with Nigerian government agencies as well. And the funding, again, is not limited to litigation. There are research aspects of our work, and we've done two research reports on corruption, including the social aspects of corruption. And I think the findings have been interesting. And so that covers the scope and scale and the funding of our work. And we have successfully made sure that we do not get any funding from the Nigerian government or from politically exposed persons in Nigeria. Of course, that would affect the objectivity of our work.
Okay, so are you sustainable in the long term? And some of the reports that you have made and the comments that you have made, how have they been received by the Nigerian government?
One can understand how they have been received. But I think over the years, we have been able to, at least to a great extent, also form partnerships with public institutions. And I'm not speaking of individuals, even though we have relationships with individuals and government also. And I think the understanding is not much more better over the years that our advocacy is not confrontational. Of course, it's nothing to do with politics, because Serap has been through very different political parties over the years. And I think where we are presently, we have a better understanding with those in public office, public institutions, that the advocacy is not confrontational, which is why we also have engagements like this, conversations like this with those in public offices. And I would say it's fair in our relationship. But sometimes, of course, our work, depending on whoever it affects, sometimes it can be ill perceived by those in public offices, which is what the question you have asked. But we have always been vindicated, ultimately, because we've had cause where we had defended the principle of human rights and not the individuals involved, even though when they appear to be on the other side. So I can't tell you categorically today that President Muhammadu Buhari, even though we initiated a lot of lawsuits against his office, not against his person, by the way, when he was in office, if any action is taken presently that impacts on his human rights, we will defend it also. Because again, we will defend him, pardon me rather, we will defend him based on that principle. So it's not the person. It's always the principle of human rights. But we've always been able to straighten things out. And there are many instances that some of our lawyers have shared in court, where in doing the business of law, you know how lawyers do their business in court, the opposing counsel will, of course, meet some of our lawyers along the corridors of the court and tell them that they're actually doing a good job. Of course, when they get back to the courtroom, the business of opposing each other on the basis of law continues. So I think we've been able to have that. I wouldn't call it we cannot call it a symbiosis yet, but we've been able to achieve that level of understanding on the part of most of people in public offices that it's meant for the greater good and it's for good governance. I think where the challenges are, and perhaps you are still going to speak about the challenges, it's more of the perception of the people and less of those in public institutions. Don't possibly come out for you on social media will be Nigerians, not even the public institution you are done advocacy against.
Okay, that's very, very good. And it's very encouraging, very enlightening at this point in time. Don't let me ask you too many questions about SERAP. On this platform, we're not discussing SERAP. So maybe when we see, I'll ask a bit more about it. But you said you've done a research on corruption. Is this research available in the public space? Who was it directed at? Have you submitted a report? And what can you tell us about corruption, the origin of corruption in Nigeria, and the costs and the consequences thereof, if at all? Did you hear me? I think it's frozen. Did you hear me?
Sorry, can you hear me? Yes, I heard you. I was trying to, I think there was a glitch in the network, and I hope that's not one of the costs of corruption. The glitch in the network, by the way.
It could be. And now the demons of corruption are after you.
So I heard you clearly when you are, I heard that clearly. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah. It's bouncing in and out, but we are trying to hear you. I don't know if you are the one that's not appropriately located or...
Yes. I think it's the network. It's showing me that my network bandwidth is low. Slow, but I think it's stabilized now. So, okay, I just need to be sure that you can hear me now. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. It has to be my network. It's telling me here that my network bandwidth is low. If I was a Nigerian politician, I would have said this is the work of the opposition, but I know it's not. So it's just one of those things that happen. That happens from time to time. So you had spoken about the report that mentioned that SERAP had undertaken on corruption. Yes, we've done two of them. One in 2019 and the other was in 2021, funded by DFID, now FCDO. And the first one looked at, picked 5 of the major sectors. Major not because in terms of the goods and services, but major in terms of the interactions that Nigerian has with those agencies. We look at the judiciary, the police, the power sector, education, and health. And so we rank them based on the perception and opinions of Nigerians. And incidentally, there were some very interesting findings. The police, I think not surprisingly, came out, according to the perception of Nigerians at that time, as the people considered the Nigerian police was as the most corrupt. And I think followed by at the power sector, the judiciary, and then health and education in that order. And it's also very interesting that people, in terms of the scale of the money, the funds that would facilitate corruption, people rank the judiciary highest. Again, not surprisingly, the nature of corruption in the judiciary will include some movement, some more money will be involved rather than the average one with the police. And in 2021, the research looked at how social norms, looks at the interaction of social norms between social norms and corruption. And very interestingly, we found that social norms play a very important role in corruption in Nigeria. And that gives us the basis to continue our advocacy. So while we are addressing, and that makes the advocacy two-pronged, by the way, while we are addressing the ills we see in governance based on human rights principles and constitutional provisions, we also do a lot of public education and enlightenment, which is, I believe, is one of the aims of conversations like this, to educate Nigerians not only how they can prevent or stop corruption, but to understand how they perhaps unwittingly contribute to corruption. And it was a very interesting time at that when we did that research, and the various advocacy rounds that we've gone on. It's available in the public domain, as you've asked. It's available on our website, where it can be downloaded. I hope that answered what you asked. I hope I didn't miss out on any of the questions.
To some extent, but let me now be a bit more specific. What is the corruption rate, if there's any such thing, in Nigeria? Okay, are we 90% corrupt, 100% corrupt, 60% corrupt? How prevalent is corruption in Nigeria? Was there a time, if any, when Nigeria was totally corruption-free? And how do people practice this corruption? And what is the cost of corruption to all of us, one way or the other?
Thank you. I hope I would be able to give us a certain number, but that doesn't exist. But there are various mechanisms, just in line with some of the research that we've undertaken in the past, that measures, that has standard metrics by way of research to measure corruption in globally, including in Nigeria. And one is what is called the Transparency International Report. And the ranking over the years have shown Nigerians moving up and up the ladder as to the perceptions. And it's very important that we speak about this, that even Transparency International, in explaining its methodology, is based on perception, how the people perceive their government. And you would agree with me that the perception of the people is very important in a democracy. If it was not important, political office holders will not go around the length and breadth of the country every 4 years to canvass for votes, to create an ideal in the minds of the people. And that is why even the TI report is based on perception. Nigeria has always been in the 100 bracket in scoring of points, that we will find a way to move down that ladder. And then you spoke about the human cost of corruption. Perhaps we need to look at what corruption is. And without being too technical or academic, I think every one of us had a good understanding. Every Nigerian has a good understanding of what corruption is. And that is why, for instance, even the United Nations Convention Against Corruption avoids giving a clear definition and all-encompassing definition to corruption, but would rather give instances of corruption. But I remember the UN Global Program defined corruption. It is the simplest and the shortest that are found as the abuse of power for private gain. And I think it's simple enough. It simply explains to everybody, whether lettered or not so, what corruption is. It's an abuse of power for private gain. We can look at it philosophically or even in the substantive definitions, but it all leads to the same, that anything that takes something from where it ought to be and puts it in the hand of either one or few people to the detriment of those other people and to the benefit of those who were given, of course, is clearly corruption. And so when we talk of the cost of corruption, that misalignment, that movement on its own is a clear cost. And so without looking at the numbers and statistics, looking at our experience in Nigeria presently, we are all victims, if I can call it that, of that movement, that abuse of power and for private gain. So it's a gain for private few and a loss, call it the victim, for many, more than 200 million Nigerians. And according to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, more than 130 million Nigerians are. And given the kind of natural resources we have, you would agree with me that those 130 million people have no business to being poor. And even if Christ has said that I would always have the poor among us, I don't think he meant over 130 million Nigerians amongst just 200 million people. So when we talk about the cost, we can look at it from many perspectives, but I think we can capture everything by putting the human cost. It is an human cost. It is a human cost, really, because like we have been told by all religions, heaven is devoid of sin. So it means that whatever gain we have to have, principally ought to happen here. And that is why even the cost is human, even though there's many nuances and facets to it, talking of sectors and the individual experiences. In the health, in education, and security, even the insecurity that we are battling is traceable directly into corruption. It is easy for some to say that those agitations are religiously driven. Not so. And researchers, this is also born out of research. It is also steeped in poverty, which has also created a platform for insurgency to rise. And the same corruption has prevented the Nigerian state to defeat that insurgency, either with kinetic or non-kinetic approaches effectively. So the cost, we can go on and on as to the cost, but it is clear for those Nigerians experiencing the hardships that they do not need to be in that position. Because again, we all hear, this year, 2024, over 23 million trillion naira was budgeted. That is apart from the extra appropriations. And so when you tell the average Nigerian that figure, of course he does the mental math. He doesn't need to go to school to know what would have done for him. And it doesn't mean he gets that cash in his hand, but he knows he could provide infrastructure. It means that his commute to and fro every day would be less stressful. It means that when his wife or his son is sick, they could get some affordable healthcare. It also means that he ought to open a tap in his or her house and get water. So you can go on and on. But when you look at the allocations to these sectors, the expenditure as published by the Auditor General, for instance, Auditor General of Federation in his report annually, you now see that those monies did not go to where they ought to have gone, hence where we have found ourselves. So the human cost is substantial in terms of numbers and in terms of experience. I would like just to give a very brief example. I like to reference that report a lot by Transparency International. A very instructive report. It was published in 2019, by the way. So there is a practice in Nigeria, just to give this context, called security votes. It is not statutory in any way. It means there is no law that actually allows it, but it's some of the vestiges of the military practice where monies are voted. Monies are voted legally. When I mean legally, it is part of appropriation, even though there is no law that permits it, to a lot of institutions in Nigeria, and it is not accounted for, as it were. And so the Transparency International released a report in 2019, and just to give you an idea, the total security vote in 2019 was 241 billion naira security votes. And that is higher than the annual budget of the Nigerian Army for that year, which is just 154 billion naira. That 141 billion is higher than the combined budget of the Navy and the Air Force for 2019, which is just 189 billion naira. So you can see that when this amount is taken out of our appropriation and paid as a security vote, and the rhetoric has always been, I don't want to call it the reason, the rhetoric has always been, it is given to public officers from the president right downwards to local government chairman to somehow secure as part of their spending on security. So if the total spending on security votes to individuals in public office is greater than the amount voted to agencies that are meant to carry out the core function of security, you can understand the legitimization of corruption, as it were. Wouldn't those funds have been better used to provide for health and education? But again, putting those funds for health and education is not enough. There must be mechanisms that also ensure that they are well spent. And so when COVID-19 came, again, referencing one of the examples of the cost of corruption, we saw how it affected Nigeria. Of course, disproportionately affected the poor more than the rich, even though the rich felt it. And that is why, again, both the poor and the rich are feeling the pinch. Now, the rich will have to travel out of the country to be able to have access to quality medical care. Why not in this country? The rich will have to buy a big generator to ensure that he or she has light. And he has to build a high fence, by the way, with electric wirings to keep up criminals. And he has to buy tons and tons of gallons of diesel to keep the generator running. So you can go on and on. So that basically captures the human cost of corruption that we have experienced over the years. And we are still experiencing, by the way.
So is there a solution to corruption? Can we solve corruption? If you are President Bola Ahmed Tinubu today and you wanted to attack corruption from a national level, what would you do?
Of course, and I'm not being optimistic because I want to be idealistic. I'm being optimistic because I know it is perfectly doable. There have been many arguments about corruption not being something that could be defeated totally. But what I would do differently, which also forms part of the advocacy we do in SERAP, is transparency and accountability. And we've seen that our experience over the years, and I can reference from 1999 till date, not talking about the other republics before then, has been that people exculpate the president or some higher ranking officers from corruption, saying that they did not know, they were not aware, which is why it is the responsibility of the president to set the rule for what are the minimum thresholds of transparency and accountability. And what that simply means is that it prevents corruption to a great deal because the people will know. Who said darkness thrives in the absence of light? So I know the provisions of the Constitution, Section 39, creates a right called freedom of expression. And it's not only the right to speak as we're having this conversation, it is also the right to be informed. So it's a two-way thing, to receive and to impart information, which is why we know the amount of the budget. It is part of that right in Section 39 of the Constitution that the government publishes the appropriation every year and lets us know that 23 billion trillion naira is the budget. But what about the details of that budget? They also do that to an extent. But what about following through to make sure that we can follow it line by line, to make sure that things that were presented last year as consumables or non-essentials are not represented this year? And that goes to the issue of transparency and accountability so that the people can own democracy. Participation in governance does not start and end every 4 years at the polls. It means that the Nigerian people can follow governance and say that, yes, we have seen this, we have not seen this. Then people take on government in that regard. Again, when they do this, it is not politics. It is not tribal religion. It's because they should be interested in governance. So transparency and accountability is a good way to start. And one example, I believe the president, you had asked me if I was the president, what I would do differently, would be an opportunity to publish his assets publicly. I think the President Yar'Adua stands on record, stands to be corrected, as the only president who has done that publicly. And the provisions of the Constitution is clear in that regard, that the president, all public officers, including the president, would publish the asset declaration forms. Of course, they will do that with the Code of Conduct, with the CCB. And the law says that the CCB will now publish it based on the law made by the National Assembly, which we believe is the Freedom of Information Act. But the president can take that steps, can take that step to hide the moral authority, if you call it that, even if it's not legal, to publish his asset declaration form so that Nigerians can see. That is on a personal level. And then on a national level, he should demonstrate it by being open and mandating everyone under him to also be open in their practices. That, I believe, will go a long way in preventing a lot of issues in corruption. For instance, SERAP had written to the previous administration under the President Muhammadu Buhari, asking for details of how much we have received so far from all over the world in terms of Abacha loot. How have they been spent? Where are the projects? I mean, you would think that these facts will be available in the public domain. It's always not doing us well by telling us. These things should be available. We wrote to the president and we wrote to the attorney general. Of course, they refused to give us the information and we went to court. And the court gave judgment in favor of Sarah just 2 years ago, declaring that government should provide us those details. And you will find it surprising that lawyers from the Ministry of Justice came to defend that freedom of information request. Of course, the court saw through their defense and gave judgment in our favor. Another important thing, we had also written to the president, under President Muhammadu Buhari also, asking for Nigeria taking a huge loan in billions of naira from China, allegedly to install CCTV and other security installations in the FCT, Abuja. We also wrote an FYI request asking for details of those loans. What are the terms and conditions? Where are those facilities? Again, we didn't get those the information under the Freedom of Information Act. We went to court. Again, ruled in our favor. But these are information that should ideally be in the public domain. The government is here to obey that judgment. So you would see how transparency and accountability would prevent corruption a great deal. And then the second step the president can take is also to be proactive. You can call it, to use the cliche, to put his mouth where his money is. And that is why instances and cases of corruption, he should demonstrate that political will to ensure that the anti-corruption agencies do their work and that individuals who have either been found culpable or associated with any form of corruption should not form part of his government. To me, those two steps, in very simple, clear terms, even though there are nuances to those contexts, would clearly aid the president in showing his commitment to fighting corruption, being transparent and accountable to the people from where he derived the power to be in Aso Rock. And I'd like to always to close with this, to show you how opaque governance is in Nigeria. If I had the opportunity to show a picture of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue here, or number 10 Downing Street, without really putting those numbers, I'm sure a lot of us would readily recognize those two buildings as being that of the White House and the official residence of the Prime Minister of Britain, respectively. I do not even know how Aso Rock looks like. I do not know. And that is how opaque governance is in Nigeria. And you do not know, and because you don't know, a lot of things happen. And when they come out in the public, it's almost a shock. Then over the years, we are now immune. So if you hear that someone stole 300 million naira, the average Nigerian is perhaps not that surprised. You still know a figure, really. Perhaps if it's in billions, then we can start talking about it. And that is how starved we are of the information about governance, that even when we get it, we thank those who are giving us a government like they've done us a favor.
Good. Now, let me ask you another question. What can the citizens do to challenge our corrupt environment and the corruption that is prevalent here? What are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 steps we can take, and all that, and what really will be able to move and shift this corruption? I'm sure you've advised government since 2004, since you were founded. What has been their response, and where are you with them?
Thank you very much. You had asked what the citizens can do. And I recall clearly, though I can't remember in scriptures, how someone had come to Jesus, one of the Pharisees, asking him in actionable steps what he can do to have eternal life. Of course, he thought it was going to be a matter of actions, do this and this. Of course, it wasn't about action. And that is why he told him that he needs to be born again, which essentially is not an action, but a change of mind. And so we can mention the steps in terms of do's and don'ts, but they really will not get us anywhere until we have a change of mind. Unfortunately, because that is intangible. We can take a series of action to demonstrate that we are changing our minds. But of course, if it's not deep, it becomes a case of 5 steps forward and 10 steps backward. And that is why I think that a reorientation of the mind with an understanding of what corruption is and the call to us is the first place to start. I recall clearly one of my professors, Professor G. George at the Lagos Business School, had defined culture as a software of the mind, which was imputed at childhood through socialization, and it will be problematic to delete it. And I can remember during those conversations then, he had said that he is not saying it is not removable, but it's going to be problematic. So in this instance, the way corruption has infused into culture, and I'm not saying corruption is part of our culture. I'm saying we have adopted and assimilated and woven it into our culture without that mindset change. And I'm not saying it's going to be a consensus or we have someone to wipe it off our minds. I am simply saying there needs to be a shared understanding, not perhaps by everyone, but by those in public office and the citizens themselves, of why we need to tackle corruption. And that would remove the enablement we have built around those who are either perpetrators of corruption or those in public offices. Which is why now, if you accuse someone of corruption, you will see people from his or her town, or people from his religious extraction, or people from even his political divide come out to attack you. And why are you attacking their son or daughter? And I think that understanding is what propels the advocacy and the action on the part of the people to do. I can't just tell people to do, because if I tell them do this and that, without that understanding, it's just simply an action that might not really be able to, particularly when you understand the context, which is why sometimes when we compare Nigeria to Singapore or Rwanda, I think we have missed the point. Nigeria has, I think, over 600 ethnic groups, 672 ethnic groups, a population of over 200 million people. Simple actions may not solve the problem. And since we're having this conversation, this question is from the aspect of the perspective of citizens. I think that shared understanding is very important. And you also spoke about where are we with government? I'm tempted to say that we're in court with government, but of course, we have various advocacy initiatives that we've had with government, including sometimes writing open letters to the president, even having meetings with public institutions, making them understand the basis of good governance. That is also in their best interest. And we also have feedback from them also. And we do not discount that. We don't discountenance their feedback. For instance, we've had meetings with principal officers of the National Assembly talking about the steps they need to take on the Auditor General's report, for instance. And we've had feedback from them telling us that, do we understand what they face on their constituents when they go back home? How every social problem, every health or education challenge is brought to them to solve from their own private pockets. And then where do we expect them to get those funds? And we have also incorporated that into our advocacy also, which is why we're having conversations like this, which is why I'm able to say clearly to Nigerian citizens that it is not enough to say do and don't do. That understanding of the mind to change our perspective is very important. So I would say with government, it's an ongoing conversation. And you can call it perhaps a bit of a carrot and stick approach. The litigation is a way to advocate for those rights, but we also understand the place of dialogue and conversations to make those in public office understand that our advocacy is not politically motivated. It has nothing to do with tribe and religion. It is basically an aspect of good governance. And we also get feedback from them. We've had people in government also reach out to Sarah to take on some common causes that they see as infringement of rights, even though sometimes that is tainted by their own political views. But if it aligns with our principle of human rights and socioeconomic rights, of course, we take it up because it's simply a matter of principle. It's not personal.
Okay, we'll soon be opening the floor up for other people to ask questions, which will be coordinated by Pastor Sonny. But let me ask you a couple more questions. I think one of the things Serap should consider doing is to actually do some research on the cost of corruption, broken down almost into monetary terms. It could be sector by sector. It could even be state by state. It could be corruption since 1966 to date, blah, blah, blah. So there could be financial costs. There could be human costs. So for example, a young man came to see me today, and he had been going on drugs. And part of the reason why he was going on drugs was because he came from a partly broken home, absentee father, and a mother who died at some stage or the other. I don't know what happened why she died. But he had to drop out of school, became jobless, couldn't find a job. did a bit of Yahoo Yahoo, fell into terrible hands, fell into a bit of depression, finally found themselves in drugs. You could say two things were primarily responsible, or three things primarily responsible for his predicament. A shaky foundation at home, which made me think very deeply that we need to do a lot of work on our homes in Nigeria, our family units, broken down almost irretrievably, single parenting, careless parenting, absent parenting, and so on and so forth. The second, of course, was the lack of social welfareism, a social welfare system that could try and pick up a little bit where the family failed. You know, in most parts of the world, you will not need to drop out of school for any reason, at least up until the end of secondary school. And then going to higher education, you could get a grant or a loan, and so on and so forth. So that failed him. But the third reason, of course, could be corruption, because why the social welfareism is not there is corruption. Why jobs are not available is corruption. Why opportunities are not available is also corruption. And why a lot of people are going into Yahoo Yahoo, you can primarily trace to alternative employment because of non-employment of traditional methods. So the fellow has to find a way. You know, having said that, Mr. Oluwadare, will you be willing, Sarah, to do this analysis, you know, so that you can look at the financial costs, we can look at the loss of opportunity. You know, a lot of industries and a lot of organizations are not establishable today because of corruption. I'll give you another example. You want to start a factory somewhere in Nigeria, the whole atmosphere, government, quasi-government, civil servants, they make it almost unbearable for you. Bring this, bring that, register this, register that, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, there's a corruption index at the back of it. A friend of mine wanted to establish factories in one state. The demands of both the state and the state officials was unbearable. He had to find another means to start his factory. The other one was a friend of mine who was importing equipment for a government hospital all the way from the US, equipment that he had obtained through personal efforts and shipped with his own resources. By the time he got to the government hospital, the chief accountant, one of the officers to receive the equipment, began to ask him what was in it for him, that he needed a bribe before he could accept equipment that were being donated to the hospital where he worked for free. My friend was so disturbed that he directed those equipments to Ghana, and they were very well received in Ghana. We don't know how many lives were lost because those equipments were not available in a Nigerian hospital. We cannot count it. You know, bad roads that lead to accidents, that people prematurely lose their lives. You can't count the cost of it. So I think somebody really needs to do a serious survey that we can show ourselves as a nation as to the cost of corruption. A man died at some stage. Anyway, let me not tell that story. It's not just a good story. Then the other thing, of course, is this issue of advocacy that you mentioned, which is one of the things we're trying to achieve on ALG, advocacy. When I did a lot of my research, I discovered that aside of selfishness, greed, and corruption, perhaps our biggest other problem or main problem was ignorance. You know, a lot of people are just blissfully ignorant of what is going on and how it affects them. Even those that are most affected the ones that are suffering the most, the ones that are in most pain, are totally ignorant. They cannot connect the dots between governance and their welfare, and so on and so forth. So this issue of opening up the minds of people, Romans chapter 12, be ye transformed by the opening up or renewal of your minds, is something that I don't know if it's within the mandate of SERAP, but something SERAP should consider doing, but it's something we're trying to do aggressively on ALG, because we feel that if people are better informed, better educated, then they can take better decisions about themselves and about their political environment. Okay, so where is SERAP? And now this is the question. I don't know if you respond whether SERAP is going to be able to do those things, but where is SERAP on the index and on the journey towards really taking on Nigeria in a lot of our issues, starting with corruption and a few others at this point in time?
Thank you very much. So when you spoke about the research on the cost of corruption, I was doing the mental mathematics, as our finance people will say. So what happens most time in our experience when we have such grand ideas, because we have projects and programs that run for periods of time with the funding that we have, the idealism is also gets to reality when the account people tell us at times that this is what we can afford, this is what we can do, and that's how I was smiling. It's something that what we have not done a research that had the specific and the numbers, and I really find it interesting. I've noted that as well. But in every advocacy piece that we take up, particularly to the government and to the people, we always capture that element of what it would, the opportunity cost, the alternative, what is costing Nigerians, not specifically in numbers, but when it comes to human angle stories. I have mine. I lost someone dear to me this year to cancer. And I know it could have been better managed. And I'm going through the journey with him to the hospital. I knew what I had to pay for every consultation. That should have been subsidized at the least. So I have some mine as well. And I know Nigerians, multiply that and millions of Nigerians. So the human angle story are the stories that we all experience. And I do agree with you if they are captured and told that way. Perhaps it will present a better narrative than from the individual way we look at it. I think that would make also a much more compelling narrative. To educate the people so that they know what the cost is in terms of we get to see these things on social media. So I would say that I do not think it's because there is no research that puts this together. The individuals, we see it on social media, being the greatest tool that allows this kind of stories unfiltered. The gatekeeping in traditional media might not allow some of those stories through, but we see them every day. Guess what the government says? They'll just say it's the work of the opposition, or even citizens defending those actions and giving it the political colorations. So I do not think it's because we do not see, but I also agree that putting the advocacy in that way will tell a much more compelling story. Look at the Chibok girls, for instance. Will Nigerians say they are not aware of what has happened to them, what is happening to them? We have organizations that up to today is keeping count of the number of these. Some of them have been in captivity. But that's why we need to continue conversations like this, which is why, again, I'll say that understanding, that perspective of a mind, and without standing too philosophical, would precede whatever changes we want to see rather than tokenism in terms of action. And government does that a lot. That also reminds me what the story you mentioned about the poor boy that happened to. We have a Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. We have a social, we have always had poverty alleviation programs in Nigeria. We've always had billions of naira allocated to those ministries. So we cannot say government is not aware. We cannot say government has not taken steps. But we only hear those figures. We do not get to see. Sarah got judgment recently against the same Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, asking them to account for how they spend COVID-19 funds. You would think that the ministry would take that opportunity to provide the figures. Of course, we went to court. And they were in court also, defending their unwillingness to provide information until court ordered them to do so. They are yet to provide those figures, right? And so, as to where SERAP is, we've come a long way since 2004. This is the 20th year of doing this. But I also think that sometimes people perceive SERAP, and I've seen some comments in these conversations also about what SERAP should do or not to do. And it's quite a lot. Which is why part of what we do and what we consider outcomes is when we are able to stimulate and galvanize citizens to take action in their own little way. Write a letter, write an FOI. We count that as an outcome for us as an organization because we understand we cannot do it all. SERAP is just a few number of people with offices in Lagos and Abuja trying to stimulate the people to understand what governance is and make them demand for their rights, and also talking to the government why they should respect those things. So we are midway into our journey. We've come a long way, I would say, 20 years. I think we'll continue to file the cases, continue to draw attention to the ills that we've seen that offshoots of corruption, and also continue to engage government on why they need to do better. And most importantly, educate the people that what we do is not tainted by politics and tribal religion.
Very good. Anybody wanting to ask questions, feel free to lift up your hands electronically, and Minister Sonny will take it from the back, and we'll then see what questions we ask. Well, let me just ask my own final question, and everybody else can then butt in. But why have we gone down this corruption path in Nigeria? Why is corruption almost a culture, especially in leadership and high leadership? I see it everywhere. I see it everywhere. People are just almost immune or impervious or guiltless of this thing. What are the reasons why this has become so?
And it didn't start now. And while we can blame that Lord Lugard, because again, there are various people who blame Lord Lugard, or perhaps even blame someone who named Nigeria, or even blame military incursion in the politics. I do not think that is really, really the problem. Because at every step of the way, just like the prodigal son, we can't begin to have that change of mind and begin that journey backwards to where we are derailed. I think it still perpetuates because we have subsumed it into our culture. And like I've told you about the definition of culture, it's a software of the mind. It is problematic to delete. So much that if I become a minister today, I don't want to be a minister, by the way. If I become a minister of the Federal Republic today, the amount of congratulations and the phone calls that will flood my phone is enough to put me on the alert that there are expectations. And people have not asked anything, apart from those who would ask directly. And we've had people also say this in the public, after serving in the public office, as to the various requests that they've been inundated with. So we see it as infused into, so that is why we need to, that delicate surgery, almost like removing pancreatic cancer with brain surgery, to remove those aspects that we've embedded into our culture and begin to do what is right, not because we are going to get, I wouldn't say not because it is good, but because we understand if we don't do it, we are suffering and we will suffer the results. And that is why the Japa syndrome is here. That is why even the president of Nigeria has to travel abroad to seek medical attention. And that is why things are like this. I think when that understanding sets in well enough for most Nigerians, I think we would begin to have that change bit by bit. And then we will stop defending those who have either stolen, because really that is the saddest thing. You see on social media, people defending people because they are from the same tribe, they belong to the same religion, and it's just a matter of governance.
Oh, I'm tired.
Okay. I'm always tempted to say that, given the kind of work that I do, I think riding a motorcycle is my own way of taking this thing off my head. Sometimes it can be so pessimistic and you can get so cynical, but I think the optimism of putting things in focus and maybe just the wind rushing past your face has helped me to remain sane. I'm optimistic.
Rescue me, Jerry.
Pastor, it's okay. Kolawole, thank you very much for coming on the program, and you've spoken so passionately about corruption. I have one or two questions. I see there are a lot of hands. I want to ask, the cases you've won in court, like the 729 billion that the court asked the Buhari minister to account for, the Abacha loot, how can you enforce this court judgment? What can the people do to get behind you? Or what can you do to get the people behind you? Because government just simply take the judgment and don't obey. What can you do? What can the people do to help?
Thank you very much. I wish I could say it in just 1, 2, 3 steps, but it's a whole lecture on constitutional framework and the rule of law. And we do not have to be experts in constitutional law to understand. The Constitution gave the judiciary as an arm of government the power to mitigate and to determine the rights, duties, and obligations of citizens and government. That's not between arms of government, which is why the state governors can go to court against the president. The same Constitution mandates all other arms, including the judiciary, to obey and enforce those laws. And there are practical mechanisms of enforcing the laws. But when you see a president that disregards the laws of the land, either in appointment or in the conduct of procurement, so what is a judgment of court? A judgment of court is an opinion of a judge sitting in a court. The law constitution that is black and white, that he swore an oath to protect, he disregarded it. What do you expect? And that is why this is a challenge. But you see, the alternative is, the alternative rule of law is a state that nobody will like. It's anarchy. We, as a legal advocacy organization, of course, will not do that. And that is why we go to court, being the most legal way to channel our grievances. And so sometimes this question gets asked, what about the judgments we've gotten? How do you want to enforce them? We will keep doing this because there is no alternative to legal advocacy to hold government to account. And it works. Maybe not necessarily in the way you think it works, but it works. Like I've mentioned, people see that they can challenge government legally, and we have seen people who also done that. And the second aspect of your question as to what the people can do, that is why I appreciate opportunities like this to have conversations like this. Ultimately, the aim, the outcome for SERAP on each of our advocacies is when the people own it. Because again, SERAP is just one of the many organizations trying to do what is right to government to account. People should own it. It means that people are talking about it. It creates a critical mass of citizens demanding for something. And I want to challenge this narrative that the Nigerian government does not listen to the people. They do. Why did they ban Twitter? Why are they so insistent on regulating social media? They listen to the people. What they perhaps will try to do is to prevent the people from speaking. But if the people can continue speaking and demanding, I really don't know what to sound pessimistic. It works. That critical mass, engage when the people own it. I think is where we need to get to.
I'm not saying it doesn't work. And I mean, I like it. Absolutely. It does work. My just question, and I will let other people ask. I think it's just, how do we take it further? Just, I know you have a lot of judgments in your bag that, and not just you, anybody that takes government to court and they get judgment debt against government today runs in billions. I saw a report once that judgment against government, state and federal, runs into, in fact, trillions. Nobody can force government to pay. Why do we run such a democracy? It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer. Let me get others to fall into the fray. Let me get Afolabi Ajidaun, wait first, then Bola Oshibodu, then Professor Grinch, and then Comrade Frederick. What we'll do, I don't know whether you have, you can take note of the questions. I will just ask that people keep their questions or comments very brief so that everybody can have a shot at asking a question. And I will really appreciate it. Thank you very much for obeying. So we'll take Afolabi first.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. First of all, my first question is very simple. What would you consider as your biggest victory in going to court, taking government? And what would you consider as your greatest loss in going to court? And my second question is, what are your views on this planned or so-called plan for constitutional review of one term, instead of 2 terms of 4 years, 1 term of 6 years for president, vice president, governors, etc.? Thank you very much.
Afolabi, thank you. Absolutely. Please let that be the model and the standard to ask questions. Let's just do it as he did. Less than a minute. Thank you. Bola Oshibodu Adetula.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will follow his footsteps.
Thank you.
My first question. I want to recommend that because people seem to be treating it from top bottom. Let us now begin from bottom up. School, I hope you are aware of what happens when students, primary, secondary, university, when they are in the exam hall. I happen to be a retired, well, I didn't retire in the school then, but I know a lot about the school. Then the second one, what can you tell us about this Dangote? Because I got a video, a WhatsApp, whatever today, that the people frustrating him are those ones that are being paid at the 3 refineries that are not producing anything. So they don't want to give him crude. Please tell us something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Grinch. Thank you very much, Sister Bola. Professor
Mute.
Grinch.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Luadare. I'll be brief, although I would like to talk to you privately sometime because of the ministerial position that you refused. Now, now, you know, transparency is obviously a sine qua non for avoiding corruption. Yes, it is known, even in government circles, that they have to be transparent. And they make, you know, there is a kind of sham transparency. You know, they have the rules that show that you have to be transparent, but they are not obeyed. You know, so SERAP needs to go more deeply into practices, not just the policies. What are the practices? To follow up on that, during Yaradua regime, we all had to swear to, you know, to present our what do we call it?
Declaration of
yes, declarations. That's right.
Asset,
We all did. But there is no consistency. You know, it's not followed up by subsequent governments. So SERAP needs to look into that type of area.
Okay.
Now, my last question is, what do you think of this local government issue? It is causing a lot of controversy.
Okay.
And I think we need to clear it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. We'll take one last one from Comrade Frederick. Then we'll let you answer them so that you don't lose the questions. Comrade Frederick, allow him to unmute. Comrade Frederick? Okay. All right. Maybe you can. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Kolawole. I follow the activities of SERAP religiously, and I can tell you that currently you are the conscience of those people that truly mean well for Nigeria. Thank you for what you are doing. I believe that if we are going to fight corruption, we must have an Attorney General of the Federation that is ready to implement court rulings. And we cannot do that without removing EFCC from the Ministry of Justice. I want to say something differently. In 2022, the government, during the caterpillar years of Buhari, he released $8.5 million for the evacuation of Nigerians from Ukraine during that crisis. I was the president of the Nigerians in Diaspora organization. Then they gave Buhari a figure of 5,000 Nigerians to be evacuated, but they ended up evacuating just 1,000 Nigerians. I became very worried that how are you spending $8.5 million of the people's money? We wrote to NEMA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also, no response. We now have to take a lawyer in Nigeria based on the Freedom of Information Act, and NEMA replied to us and gave us details of how they spend the money. If you see the details of the money or how they spend the money, you will be highly provoked, to say the least. But to cut story short, we found out that $4.7 million was unspent from that money. On street price value today, that is 7.7 billion naira. We wrote to EFCC, we wrote to CBN that we want further investigation about this matter. There was no response. Maybe they have some persons that hide their letters. I don't know. We also published it on national media. We have all the documents. If I send that document to you, will you be able to partner with us to find out who took that money? Because I know that sitting President Tinubu removed the NEMA president, the NEMA director. But who took that money? It is public money. Because what we are suffering today is because of the silence of the people. It is our responsibility as Nigerians to look into issues like this when it concerns public wealth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Frederick. Kolawole, I guess you can try those 4 first, then we'll come back to the next 4. I have Auntie Yemisi, Dr. Adeola, Pastor Funke, and Fumi Ajayi Tomori, those 4. Okay, go ahead, Kolawole.
Thank you very much. I like the way you said I should attempt or try. Because, and some of these questions are better addressed to the Minister of Information. Okay, so Mr. Folabi, he has asked, and thank you very much for the questions, by the way. It shows that we've been following the conversation. What is the greatest win and loss of SERAP in court? So in terms of, I wouldn't speak in terms of specific cases. I will speak to the issues. There have been instances where the judge would also speak, sometimes off record, about SERAP's activity. And I think that's the best outcome. Not even the final ruling, because it shows that, don't forget, the judge is also a human being, is a Nigerian. That shows that the judge also understands the nature of the issues and what SERAP is doing. So for those few instances, it's really a win, irrespective of the final outcome of the cases before the court. And also some of the informal comments from even lawyers on the other side, from the government, who also tell us that this is very good, even though they also continue to defend this case in court. I consider that more a win than for the cases themselves. But if it's to speak in terms of cases that we've won, I would say it's the judgment we got telling the government that the banning of Twitter was unlawful. If I was to pick one of the many cases that we've taken to court. And as to the loss, it's very, I consider it painful when I see people misunderstand the essence of the public interest litigation. And sometimes I understand it's based on frustration as to what we set up is just to go to court. And people think that perhaps, and I'm going to correct that impression. Now, SERAP is not an anti-corruption agency. SERAP is a civil society organization, what is called an NGO in Nigeria. We are not a government agency. I consider that a loss when I see people do not understand, intentionally, seriously call it political, religious, or whatnot. And then as to the views on my views on the constitutional review on the terms of the precedent. The people in the National Assembly represent various constituencies. What I would expect the Nigerian people to do is to express what they feel to those in the National Assembly. I was at a forum earlier in Abuja last month in Abuja, where a member of the House of Representatives complained that out of the call for memorandum that they put out for people to comment and send in their memo on amendment of the Constitution, I think he said they got just a few, not up to 100 or so, if I remember correctly. I would expect that is what the Nigerian people should do. If my view just represents one person, I can only put in a memorandum or call the House of Reps, the National Assembly member representing my constituency. That is what Nigerians should do, to show whether they want it or they do not want it. I think that is far much more important in terms of following due process. Because if the National Assembly passes that resolution, I hope we know that becomes law. It is not about whether it's right or wrong. It becomes law. We need to understand that so that we can act now when we have time. And then Madam Bola recommended the bottom-up approach, including educating people from the grassroots. I totally agree as well. And we've tried to partner with other NGOs in this regard with some success. But again, and the reason why we do the top-to-bottom approach is Nigeria has 704 local governments, not counting the LCDAs, 36 states. we can't possibly cover everything. And that's why we also understand and appreciate conversations like this that engage the citizen to do what they can, and we're always willing to help in areas that we can help. So it's a good thing, and if we can support that, we encourage and we support it also. And she also spoke about, she asked this question about those frustrating Dangote refinery. I do not know those who are frustrating Dangote. I do not know why, if that is true. I really do not know. But what is most important is if there is any amount of public funds in that enterprise, it must be accounted for. And then Professor Grange spoke about transparency and accountability, and that SERAPs need to do more deep dive into practical aspects of corruption. I'd mentioned the issues of security votes. There are many, many more issues, including pension for former governors and their deputies. But thankfully, we've had 2 or 3 states respond to SERAP's advocacy and set aside those, repealed those laws. So there are many nuances to corruption. We can't possibly cover everything. But again, we take the major issues, we do a deep dive, and some of them we get outcomes like the pension law that we spoke about, including things like constituency allowances and constituency contracts and all that. And she also spoke about the salary of the National Assembly. She didn't say that. She was talking about transparency and accountability. And so I made that example. I wanted to note that example, that when you talk about the salary of a member of the National Assembly now, the practice is not the salary. The practice is what comes as other aspects of allowances in the budget of the National Assembly that is not open to the people. And she also spoke about the autonomy, the judgment of the Supreme Court. SERAP endorses that, by the way, and we put out a statement on our social media, and it's also in the public domain, featured by major newspapers. We welcome that judgment, and we think it's a right way to go. Then Comrade Frederick wants an Attorney General that will enforce judgment. That is what the Attorney General should do. Section 174 of the Constitution is very clear as to the powers of the Attorney General and who the Attorney General is supposed to represent. He represents people because he's a public officer, the Minister of the Federal Republic. He also gave examples of the $8.5 million, according to him, he spent to evacuate the Nigerians from Ukraine. Please feel free to reach out to me. Let us see if we can do any kind of legal advocacy on it. But most importantly, SERAP is not an anti-corruption agency. We cannot prosecute, but we can engage in advocacies to get the law enforcement agencies, the anti-corruption agencies, to do their work and follow it, and also educate Nigerians as those steps proceed, including trial, arraignment trial, and possible conviction. But please, you can always reach out to me, and then we can take that up with the anti-corruption agencies that will petition. Thank you. I hope I was able to do justice to that, or attempt to.
Thank you very much. You see, you have done very well. Let's take the next set of questions, and I trust this next set of people will also go in the format of the last 4. So I have Auntie Yemisi Ransom Kuti, Dr. Adiola Popola, Pastor Funke Awolowo, and Fumi Ajayi Tomori. So we'll take them in that order. Auntie Yemisi, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hey, hello, Mr. Kolawole. Good to see you. On the forefront of the continuance of Aluta, because you are doing your Aluta in court, and very commendably so. Just 2 questions in addition to the court judgments that you've had and have not been executed. Is there no kind of statutory time frame for execution? Is it something that you can also take up, to the Supreme Court, follow up to the Hague and other steps? Because it kind of feels a little depressing that we get court judgments, and if there's no statute of limitations, can we still follow it up so that people know that once we do get those judgments, it will be enforced? Second question, I see SERAP do a lot of work nationally. I'm wondering how you can localize, particularly maybe in the local government that you are, now that we have this judgment, giving the local governments more autonomy? Is it something that you'd be willing to do more of that advocacy and legal work that you're doing in the local government? Let's see how we can ensure that there's a mechanism for accountability and transparency in the local government, and have the backing of SERAP, which is the juggernaut in this area, to make sure that officers are held accountable. Thank you so much for what you're doing. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you very much, ma. Dr. Adeola Popola, unmute yourself.
Thank you so very much. This is such an interesting topic. Number one, Sarah, please congratulations. Uncle Kola Oluwadare, you are my uncle, taking this up. We've always wanted people to at least tell us the truth, somebody to be on the side of the public. It's always been division, everything about Nigeria. And that's the problem. Corruption has become a word that is a common carpet. We sweep everything under corruption, forgetting that what we are saying is that some people stole, some people didn't follow due process, and some people are quite ignorant. So when we sweep everything under corruption, we really don't get at issues. And that is, I'm in the medical, and I have some of my bosses there. I'm going to mention them down the line. They say corruption when you fail to succeed, and it's network when you're able to get it through. And we all revel in that. We all say we're catching up on our network. Whereas what we are doing is that we are subventing the procedure and protocol. Okay, so let's just say we are all involved in corruption to a large extent. And I normally tell people it's either because of what we did or what we failed to do. So what we've been failing to do is what SERAP is doing, and that's why I'm congratulating you. Number two, which I'm going to say is that every time the governor comes to your local government area, comes to your street, comes to your function, okay, is going to tar the road on your road in your village, and you congratulate him. Meanwhile, he has circumvented and taken money belonging, budgetary money belonging to the local government area or to the state, and as an individual, choose to spend it in a way it's not supposed to, and yet we ail it. This system that lets you and I go to governors, go to reps and others, come and do the one in my own area, and we say it's network, is something that is wrong. A governor cannot just be coming to a place and then you now go on and say, we're going to start the road because the governor is coming to this place. What is on the budget? Is it on the budget that that road should be started? Okay, as the job of several technocrats, professionals who start and do the budget, and I've said this road will be started at so and so point, at so and so time, everything is rubbish. And the government spends all the money. And we all condone this. And that's another area that we're supposed to call out. Number three, which is the question I'm asking, sir, is SERAP will get too big if we keep on giving you all the responsibilities. Do you have plans to have upline and downline, in which case you want to foster university association that is going to be doing this ombudsmanship? And finally, data. Do you have a data that you can always be posting out to let us see all the cases you've been taking up, whether the one that's succeeded, one that has failed, so that we keep it rolling? This is one of the consistency that we're talking about. Some of you have a foresight and insight about what is going on, and we'll get a better result out of your activity. But meanwhile, congratulations, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adeola. Those were very, very insightful comments and one or two questions. Pastor Funke Aolo.
Good evening.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, I want to appreciate Mr. Dr. Kolawole for all his contributions on Chibok girls, on the Abacha looting and everything, because I see them as a constant voice that have kept at it all over the years, and I'm saying bravo to all they have done. Then I'm going to reiterate what Pastor Itwa asked. Where did we get it wrong? Because all that we are talking about, corruption has been there since the 60s. And that's why, every time I'm online, I see what my granddad said many years ago coming up. It just tells me that we have not changed. And there's always this gang up. You can call it oligarchy, a gang up to make sure that the best person does not win elections. Like during Papa's time, I think the second time, actually, I will quote, and I will not name the person. He said, the best man does not have to win. And there was a gang up to ensure that, Papa did not get there. And it was afterwards that somebody like Ojukwu said, the best president that Nigeria never had. Let's fast forward to what happened in the last elections. We saw that the new youngsters, they were the NSAS and all that. It was clear, and we were looking forward to the change. But also we saw another gang up, making sure that the best man did not get it. And I want to, what do we do? Because we see a degeneration over the years. How can we do the right propaganda? Talking about propaganda, it was by propaganda somebody like Hitler was able to brainwash a whole system. So you see, if the propaganda is right, we can actually do a renewal of the mindset, because you see what we have today is horrid and is going down the drain. SERAP has done so much. African group that we are in, we're doing our own part, but there's a lot of wrong mindset out there that needs to be corrected, and it has to be wholesome work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. Great. Grateful for your comments. Auntie Fumi Tomori.
Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Dr. Kolawole, I'm extremely delighted that finally you've come on board, because I follow you closely on Sahara Reporters. And I must congratulate you for all the work you have done. Howbeit, I think the responsibility is so huge. And I'd like you to please educate me on how you think we can strengthen the institutions. Here in this country, there is more emphasis on individuals than on institutions. How do we strengthen our institutions to be able to tackle the enormous cancer facing us? Number two, how would you intensify collaboration partnership with professional bodies and the other CSOs? Because this work is so much and it involves the survival of this country. How do we move forward? Then number three, I think since you raise money from some local or international organizations, how would you want to intensify your GoFundMe so that even there are so many people, this thing is costly to each individual in this community. So if you have some sort of GoFundMe, anybody who has 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 50 can contribute to strengthen you to work harder on this assignment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Auntie Martin. Okay, great. Let's allow Kolawole to respond to these questions as we begin to coast home, and the president may come back, or if my co-host Jumoke has one or two questions, we may still have. But I'll allow you to answer those four. Is he still here? Okay, yeah,
Yes,
he is.
I'm here.
Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
Now, the barrage of questions makes me understand now why President Obasanjo used to clear his throat before he answers any question during these presidential interviews. Thank you very much. So Auntie Yemisi spoke about Anduta and asked about the statute of limitation on the judgment. And once again, I appreciate everyone for the comments and the questions. It shows once more that we are following the conversation. And so there is no statute of limitation on judgments, as it were. We can always get them enforced. What we need is the political will on the part of the on the part of they are not contract cases, by the way, that some of those things will apply on the part of government to enforce the judgments. And these are public interest lawsuits. They are not even personal interest. But Serap has no personal interest in Abacha Loot beyond the common interest of transparency and accountability and freedom of expression. The judgment we got on the humanitarian ministry, the judgment we got on education, on providing education to Nigerian people, they are all public interest. So they can be enforced by the government. The only thing lacking is political will on the part of government to enforce this, which is why, again, the idea is for people to hone this advocacy, press it home, and be able to get government to act. And I believe government listens, they hear. I think we've been far divided by politics, tribe, and religion that it hasn't made us achieve that critical mass. And we can, if we continue to press forward the advocacy. We are taking the legal steps. We've gone to court. And there are legal mechanisms that we can take. We've had instances of going to court to file contempt proceedings against government officials who refuse to obey the court judgments. And we are still considering that too as we go. And then she also mentioned localizing our advocacies in the local government. Yes, we partner with organizations from time to time, but we can't be everywhere. We are limited in our capacity also, which is why conversations like this deepen our advocacy. And that's why I appreciate this opportunity so that people can hear. We also take up advocacy programs on TV, on radio in communities in Nigeria so as to scale up the advocacy, but we can't be present everywhere. And we partner with people from time to time. And Dr. Pukola called me on Pukola. I've been called many things, including a doctor. And just for clarity, so that I am not accused of deceiving Nigerians, I am not a doctor. My name is Mr. Mr. Kola. So he spoke about.
But there's another Kolawole in Serap, right?
Yes, that's the chairman of the board. That's the chairman of the board.
Yeah, he comes on TV. Yeah, that's right. Go ahead.
If I had to check again to be sure that I've not been given a title that I didn't acknowledge, maybe an honorary doctorate. Not yet. So Dr. Kokola spoke about being involved, every Nigerian being involved in corruption, and perhaps how Serap can dovetail this into. You had mentioned university, tertiary institutions, and we have something running, yes. It's called Serap Accountability Club. So what we do is to equip, empower, and do capacity building activities for students. Presently, I think we are in 13 tertiary institutions in Nigeria, and we are scaling up to get students involved early so that they understand. So the aim is not to tell them to go and advocate for good governance, but they understand it. And so that when they eventually ease into being citizens in the workforce, they also understand. And some of them perhaps will also end up in places of importance where they can leverage what they've learned to not only preach, but to also practice what they've been preaching over the years. So that is running. It is called Serap Accountability Club. And so for anyone who has wards in tertiary institutions, we encourage them to join that. And then he asked if we have data on our losses and wins. Yes, they are on our social media. They are on our website, yes. www.serap-nigeria.org. We have our cases there. And then we have a compendium of cases also, which contains our wins and our losses. We've published 2 editions now. We're working on a 3rd one that should be out in August. We can also make that available. There's a link to that on the website for the 1st and 2nd volumes of that compendium of Serap judgments. That is the ones that we've had judgments, not the ones in court. And then Pastor Funke, yes, asked how we got here. I wish I can answer that question. Unfortunately, we are here. She also asked about the propaganda. She had called it that can bring about some sort of attitudinal change. I think it doesn't have to be propaganda. It has to be this education, but we cannot afford to give up. So we need to continue these conversations. Some people in public institutions will want this to stop, that it doesn't work. I do not think it works. We need to, which is why I appreciate the organization for doing this. We need to continue to do this, scale up. People are enlightened, they get educated, and they're armed to continue this advocacy. I think that's the best way to go about this. And then Mrs. Fumi Ajayi asked, how can we strengthen institutions? As against individuals, we need to have strong institutions. Yes, we say this all the time. We all know it. And I think the answer lies in understanding the values and principles in democracy. It is not human. So if, as a governor, I construct a road Yes, you can thank me if you think being African values and culture, you want to, but the value is transparency and accountability, is accountable to the people, is not doing us a favor. We need to understand that. So that means that there is nothing, as people say, you insulted the governor or the president. It's not a crime. It's neither a criminal offense or a civil wrong. The president responds to the people and he answers to the people. And that is also the same for everyone in public office. The Constitution is very clear on that, by the way. And they also asked if we have partnerships with private institutions and CSOs. Yes, we do that a lot from time to time. We even have some with government agencies as part of what we do. We've done something with the National Orientation Agency in the past, also part of our joint advocacy to educate Nigerians. And we partner with other civil society organizations as well. And about funding, she asked if we can perhaps do some GoFundMe. I'll have to take that to the board. I do not know if we are permitted to do that, but it's not a bad idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kolawole. I think at this stage, I will bring Jumoke in to give us, before you give us your closing remark, Pastor Itua will come back to probably ask you the final questions. I want to commend what you guys are doing in SERAP, and it's what we are all following and what we should all be doing. For me, I think there should be some class citizens action when we get some of these judgments, and not fight, like you say, it's advocacy and you go to court. When we get these court judgments, there should be some way all of us can come together and say the least government can do at least is to obey their court judgment. After all, the court belongs to them and to us, so we must all find a way to get involved in that aspect at least, and the people must be sensitized to do that, and we can partner with you to push that kind of narrative, So thank you very much. I will bring in Jumoke Akintaylor, who would maybe take some few announcements and some housekeeping, and Pastor Itua will come back. Thank you very much.
Thank
Jumoke,
you,
over to you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kolawole, for being our guest here. Really appreciate that. And as Pastor Sonny has said, we would like to follow up with you on collaboration and how we can continue to build that coalition of civil society organization of like minds that are in this space. So we would also like to know more about your the club. It's one of the initiatives that we're looking at here at ALG. We have the Citizens Responsibility Campaign that we would also like to probably talk to you about and see how we can collaborate on that. And we have a youth arm where we're also the real advocates trying to really engage them in this reorientation. So we have that school, and we'll follow up with you on conversation on how maybe we can share curriculum or even facilitators. Pastor Tayo is the director of our School of Leadership and Governance. So there's a lot that we can really collaborate on. And so we look forward to that, the continued engagement. Hopefully this is not a one-off. We will continue this conversation on and behind the scenes as well. So thank you for your time. I just want to also announce that it's the same Zoom link every Thursday. Thank you, everyone. For those of you joining us for the first time, we have a link in the chat that you can register. So we have your contact information, and we can keep you posted on the events that we're doing here at Africa Leadership Group. And also, when the next cohort of the Citizens Responsibility Campaign will start, Pastor T will bring would notify us of that. I think that's all I have for now. One more thing, our youth is launching their own discussion series on Saturday. So would encourage everyone to please support them. It's similar to what we're doing here, but it's the youth arm of ALG, and they'll be discussing leadership, responsible, ethical, accountable leadership, and the role of education in that. We'll also send out the flyer for you to encourage them. We're doing all this for them because the future of Nigeria is really in their hands. So thank you, everyone, and I'll hand over back to Mr. President.
Okay, thank you all very much for coming this evening. I think it's been a very wonderful session. God bless you. God keep you. God direct your path. Our great guest, you spoke exceedingly well. You'll be minister in charge of anti-corruption. I think that's what I think that's what Professor Green wants to discuss with you. Amen. Then we'll see what you will do with your security vote when they give it to you. Because they will soon give you security vote also.